So today I'm going to show you how I make a traditional Czech pastry called Kolaches. So the night before, you have to soak your fruit, and it's dried fruit. You have to soak the dried fruit in water. So I'm soaking apples, dried apples, in water. You just want to cover it with enough water for the fruit to reconstitute. I'm also soaking some prunes, some pitted prunes, and some dried cherries. So you're gonna just go ahead and put the lids on these containers and let them sit overnight. So I'm gonna make for you some kolaches, and I promised one of the people on my YouTube channel here that I would do these kolaches for Christmas. All you need to start is some yeast. I actually use 1.5 packets of rapid rise because, as you know from my other cooking videos, I'm not super patient. I don't like to wait all day for things. So this is 1/2 cup of butter. You're also going to need 2 eggs. Kolaches are an enriched dough, so they have eggs and milk. What I do is actually start with a mug of warm water, and then I add evaporated milk instead of dissolving the yeast in the milk itself. But some people are going to want to dissolve the yeast in the milk itself, which is fine. I prefer to dissolve my yeast in water because it works a little bit quicker that way. So we're going to go ahead and put in our 1.5 packets of this rapid rise yeast. Now, kolaches usually have about 3 different rises. If you don't use rapid rise yeast, you might need to have more than 3 rises with your dough, but because this is rapid rise, we only have to wait 3 times. So you're just gonna go ahead and put the yeast in that warm water and then whisk it around. So get some kind of a whisk. I still have my handleless old whisk. From my other videos, you'll remember that, you know, my whisk is missing its handle, so I still have that. So you're just gonna whisk that yeast around in the warm water, and you want to make sure that water is the temperature of when you run it over your wrist. It'll be just slightly warm to the touch, not too warm, not hot, definitely, but not cold. So that's kind of what your yeast should look like. It should be a little bit bubbly, but as long as you see those little kind of floating particles in the yeast, you want to go ahead and continue to whisk it until it's fully dissolved. And you can't see any more of those little pieces of yeast. Okay, once it's fully dissolved, we are going to go ahead and add our evaporated milk. Now I do have measuring cups now. These are basic dry ingredient measuring cups, but they work. I have measuring cups because I've been logging my food, and I have lost about 20 pounds through the process of doing that. So I'm glad I acquired some measuring cups and a scale, a food scale. So let's see, this is going to be probably about 3/4 of a cup or so of the evaporated milk that we're going to just go ahead and add to the dissolved yeast in that water. And you're going to just go ahead and whisk that around as well. Some people also like using dry milk. Other people, like I said, just use 2% or whole milk instead of using the warm water. And if you want to do that, you can just kind of slightly warm up your milk before getting the yeast into it. But again, don't make it too hot, because if you kill the yeast, none of this works. I'm going to take my butter and put it in that same measuring cup, so I don't have to clean multiple dishes, and go ahead and just melt it in the microwave. Meanwhile, I have my eggs here, and I'm going to add the eggs to that dough. 2 eggs. So once you've added those 2 eggs, go ahead and kind of beat them with your whisk. I just kind of hit the yolks with the middle of the whisk to kind of break them up, and then go ahead and whisk them around. And as you can see, this is already looking nice and rich because it has that milk and eggs, and it's not just like an oil and water type of yeast dough. It's a nice creamy kind of yeast dough. So this pastry is not super light and fluffy. It's more, it has more substance to it, being an enriched dough. So we're just gonna go ahead and mix that around. Now, if you didn't set out your eggs or your milk wasn't room temperature, then by now that warm water is probably slightly cooled off. But we are going to add the melted butter to this, and that's going to kind of warm it back up. You always want to make sure though that the butter is not too hot. I'm kind of breaking up the middle of the butter where it's colder and kind of blending it with the warmer butter in order to make sure that it's not overall too hot and going to kill the yeast. So once your butter is at a nice kind of room temperature, but it's melted, it has to be kind of mostly in liquid form because otherwise it's a bit hard to stir into the batter. We're going to go ahead and slowly whisk that in. You can see this does have some chunks, but they are very soft chunks of butter, so they are going to whisk in. Okay, so that's a 1/2 cup of butter, and your dough should now look even creamier. 2 eggs, a 1/2 cup of butter, 3/4 cup of that evaporated milk, and about a cup or so, a mugful of the water. Next, we're going to add just a little bit of sugar. The sugar is not, not a super big part of the dough. I would say it's maybe like 1/4 cup or so. You just kind of sprinkle it over top. It's just to slightly sweeten the dough, but you don't want the dough to be overly sweet because the filling itself and the glaze on top of the filling is going to be extra. That's going to be the sweetness. And kolaches are not an overly sweet pastry. So whisk in that sugar. Then we're going to add about a teaspoon or so, I would think that is, of salt. And once again, I did use salted butter, so if you want to use a little bit less salt, if you don't like your dough to be, on the sweet and salty side, you can always use less sugar, less salt. Adjust it according to whether or not you use the salted butter. Last but not least, we're going to add the flour. So, I am going to use the Pillsbury flour. I've had some bad experiences with flour recently, and it's been affecting some of my bread, making it kind of more crumbly, and I think it's just because maybe the flour, the off brands or the generic brands just aren't as fresh. So the flour has more gluten in it the closer it's been to being ground. So if it was more recently, the wheat was more recently ground, then it'll have more gluten, and the gluten really helps it rise. So we're gonna just pour in, I'd say, a couple cups or so flour. a spoon of some kind and kind of stir that around. One way to stir is to start in the center and kind of make your circles bigger as you go, and that then incorporates the flour into the dough. Now with kolaches, we don't want to make a sponge. We're not starting with a sponge exactly, but because this is rapid rise yeast, I'm going to not knead it the first time. I'm just going to kind of stir it into a nice dough, and then it's going to be experiencing its first rise after that. So we're almost there, almost ready for the first rise. You can see the dough is getting thicker. And this is why I add flour just according to eye, because it really has to look a certain kind of way when it's ready. Add a little bit more flour. You don't want to add too much flour or it will become too heavy. Alright, so when it kind of starts to form a ball like that, it starts to become a little bit more stiff, and it takes some effort to stir. You can see it's a lot thicker than it was. Then it's kind of ready for its first rise. So just go ahead and kind of pull it away from the sides of the bowl. Clean off your spoon. And we're going to get a tea towel and let it do its first rise. So for a tea towel, I like to just have a nice thin cotton towel, and I actually run warmish water, again not hot, but kind of nice warm water over the top of that. Soak it, and then you're gonna go ahead and squeeze it out. And take that and just cover the top of your bowl. So you're going to let this rise until that dough is doubled in form, which will probably be, and I kind of tuck the ends of the towel under the bowl and set it down. Probably will be about 45 minutes, maybe an hour. Then we'll come back to it. We'll knead it a little bit, and then go ahead and add in a little more flour while we're kneading it. Let it rise again, and then the third rise, we're going to actually shape the pastries, the kolaches, and get the filling ready. Now I've soaked all of my fruit overnight, so these are it's dried fruit that's been reconstituted, cherries, as well as prunes, as well as these were dried apples, and I'm going to add a fourth filling, poppy seed filling. So we have poppy seed, prune, apple, and cherry. It's kind of one of those recipes where you can make multiple flavors and everybody has their favorite flavor. So it's kind of cool to be able to choose, kind of like donuts, like a box of donuts. Like these are a lot healthier than donuts, I think, or somewhat healthier. Probably more carbs on the wheat side of it, on the bread side of it, but less sugar overall, so less sugar carbs. So anyway, we will come back when this dough is nicely risen and doubled in size, and then we will do the second rise and then shape them, do the third rise, bake them up, and let you experience the type of kolaches. Everybody has their own recipe, only like family tradition recipe. So some people make these with like a cheese filling. Some people I have read make these with like a brushed egg thing on top, an egg wash. just different ways. Some people put lemon in the dough. I don't remember ever doing that. So this is just how I made these growing up. And once again, I promised one of the subscribers that I would do this recipe for her because she was kind of looking for an authentic kolache recipe. And to be honest, I don't even know if kolache is the way you even say kolache, but that's how we said it. So this is just my version, and take it or leave it, but I hope you enjoy the outcome. So our dough has risen, it's doubled in size, and we're going to just sprinkle a little bit of flour on top and punch it down, and just kind of get the flour around the edges a little bit, so with your fingers you can turn it onto your surface. I like to not get my fingers too sticky with the dough, so just kind of put a little flour into the bowl to get it to scrape out, because it is a little sticky on that first rise. And then I'm going to actually bring my camera down a bit so that you can really see this process. So this is about the consistency of the dough should be after that first rise. You can see it does have a little bit of a golden color to it, not so yellow as challah. Challah is more of a Jewish bread that has 4 eggs in it. And sometimes even people put 5 or 2 eggs and 2 egg yolks or whatever, but the 4 egg yolks really make it very yellow. This is a golden kind of a color, but you can still kind of see those egg whites, the evidence of the egg yolks in there, versus just a typical yeast bread that doesn't have the enriched dough with the eggs. So you want to kind of get enough flour in there to where it's still soft, but it's not sticking to your hands. And then you're just going to keep turning it. And I like to punch and turn, punch and turn. And this can become kind of a meditative process. Just make sure that your surface is lightly floured, so as you turn it, if there are any sticky parts, they'll work themselves into the flour. However, you're not over flouring. You don't want to over flour, because if you add too much flour in and you get the dough too stiff, then it's not going to be a nice pastry dough for your kolaches. So this is looking really good. I don't even know. I don't count how many times I need. I just, punch it, turn it, punch it. So as I'm punching, I'm turning, and you can see that it's like punching in. And that just kind of keeps the kneading process going, makes a nice, even, smooth knead. So yeah, once you kind of get it close, you can kind of see that if you press into it, it should bounce back. If it stays too indented, then you want to knead just a little bit more. You want that to bounce back, and that's going to tell you that your kneading is done. Now I'm going to save my bowl. I'm going to actually oil the bowl this time, and just put the oil right over top of the little bits of dough that might have clinged to the sides of the bowl. Oil the bowl and put this in for the second rise, and then when we take it out after the second rise, we're actually going to be shaping the pastries into circles, flat circles, letting those rise, and then kind of punching down the middle of the circle, almost like where there would be, like a donut hole or something in a donut, but we're just going to kind of lightly press it down and then put the fillings in. So after this second rise, I will go ahead and make the fillings, finish off those fillings, and have them cooling so that we can, after the third rise, kind of put a little indentation in the dough and put those fillings in there, and then kind of let it do another maybe half rise or so. So you can see I've almost used up all of my flour here. Let's see how that dough is doing. See how it springs back now? It doesn't stay indented. Before, if I pressed it, remember, like the fingerprint was a lot deeper. So I'm pressing it with the same pressure, but it's springing back. And that means that the dough is finished kneading. And we can, just gonna lightly flour it a little bit more. We can go ahead and kind of knead it one last time into a nice ball so that it's going to stand up like so when we put it into that bowl. So take your bowl, grab some oil of some kind, not a ton, just enough. Put a little oil on your hands. Your hands are gonna be, you know, you've just been kneading. So just kind of put, I don't know, maybe that was about 2 tablespoons or so of oil. Maybe a third to get the sides. Just make sure that the bottom of your bowl in particular is nice and oiled so that when you put this in, you just kind of plop it in and then turn it over and see that oiled surface. Now when this rises, it's not going to stick to that moist cloth. So we're going to put the same moist cloth right over top, and we're going to leave it alone for another hour or so, and then we'll come back after the second rise. So this is what your dough should look like after the second rise. It should fill that bowl all the way up to the top and then some. And if you've oiled it nicely, then it's not going to stick to that damp towel. We're going to punch it down and turn it out onto a surface that is lightly floured. So let's go ahead and turn that dough out, and we're going to sprinkle some flour over the top as well. Just kind of punch it down. Just want to make sure that it's not sticky for the rolling pin. Now you can use a rolling pin, or you can just kind of pat it out with your hands, whatever you prefer. The rolling pin is going to probably give you a little bit more of an even thickness. So you want it only to be about 1/2 of an inch thick or so. Like, you want it pretty thin, but not like cookie thin, just more like I guess like a donut. If you've ever made donuts before, that kind of a thinness. So it's about maybe as thin as like your pinky finger or something like that. So roll it out, and then you're going to cut this into circles. So the circles are going to rise for just a little bit before we do the filling. So this is the mug that I'm going to use for my circle form, to just cut out those circles. Then we're going to go ahead and put these on a greased cookie sheet. So I'm just going to take a little bit of Crisco and go ahead and grease, just lightly grease 2 cookie sheets. Okay, and then we're going to go ahead and put these on the cookie sheet like so. Now, unlike cookies, you really don't, it's fine if they are a little closer together, because usually kolaches run into each other when they rise anyway, so it's fine if they're closer together than you would necessarily place cookies. So there are 12 on that pan, and I'll put some on this pan. Go ahead and just grab your dough. And we're going to roll it out once more. Cut out some more circles. Go ahead and put those on your cookie sheet. And then we're going to let this rise, these rise one last time. So this is the last full rise. And then once they're risen and kind of puffed up, we're going to just pinch down the center and put the fruit filling in there. So you're going to take the fruit that you've soaked overnight. These are the cherries. And you're going to put them each in their own little pan. These are the apples and the prunes. And then you're going to add about maybe like a 1/4 cup of sugar or a little less, just a little heap of sugar on top, and then any spices that you want. I like cinnamon with the apples. I like to use a little vanilla actually with the cherries, and a little bit of lemon juice and nutmeg with the prunes. And then you're going to go ahead and just stir that all together and bring it to a boil and let it kind of make a sort of candied preserve type sauce around the dried fruit. And it's going to be really thick. So this is thicker than a jam. It's thicker than even a pie filling. It's different than a pie filling and jam in consistency. So you can kind of see it's kind of like just a really thick syrup, and there's not much of the syrup. It's mostly fruit with just a little bit of syrup. So the cherries here have the most liquid in them. So I'm going to cook them down until they're nice and thick like the apples and the prunes. This is the poppy seed filling, and by the way, it takes a lot of poppy seeds to make this. I'm not going to kind of go into all of the ins and outs, but it's basically poppy seeds, corn syrup, sugar, and lemon juice, as well as a little bit of vanilla. So these are the 4 finished fillings. So now that the kolaches have risen a bit, we're going to just go ahead and take our 2 fingers and punch down in the center, like so, all of them. I'm just gonna do one pan at a time and then put the filling in, and then we'll let them rise just a little bit longer and then go ahead and bake them. So with this third rise, you don't have to cover the kolaches, and after they're filled with that little short rise, you don't have to cover them either. So kolache filling, as you can see, is really thick. It's a lot thicker than a jam or even preserves, both of which would probably kind of like boil over when baking. This is the cherry filling, and you just want to put about 1.5 teaspoons or so, like a nice amount. You don't want it to be too much, but you definitely want to have a nice amount of that fruit filling in the middle. And always make sure that your fillings are cooled off enough to use. You can see that a little bit of filling, like I didn't make much of each kind of filling, but a little bit does go a long way. So we are almost done. I'm just gonna kind of evenly distribute the remainder of the juices here. So that's cherry, that one's done. Next, I'm going to do the apple. And I'll show you these. You see the nice pan of them there. And then I'm going to go ahead and just set that pan aside and get my my small tin here. Do these and then do the last pan. So I made the least amount of apple just because I like to have, you know, one or two, but it's not my very favorite flavor. It's kind of one of those basic flavors. I'm not as interested in basic flavors as things that are, you know, a little more interesting, have a little more depth. But apple, it's still good. Still, you know, still a classic. So, gotta do some, you know. So we had four apple ones total. Like I said, these are kind of like a box of donuts where you have a lot of different flavors, and then people can choose from the flavors at hand. So everybody kind of has their own favorite flavors of kolaches. Here's the last pan. Just gonna go ahead and go around and punch down the middle of these guys, and then once we get them filled, we will go ahead and let them rise just for a little bit, just to get that little center kind of risen up a little bit, but we don't want to let it rise too much. So that's kind of what they look like before they're filled. So we're going to go ahead and finish the prune ones. The prune is actually my favorite flavor, which you wouldn't think so. Like, prune doesn't sound that good, but I put some lemon juice and vanilla and nutmeg in with the prune filling, and it really is just super tasty. And I just like the consistency of the prune filling. It's nice and thick. Prunes just cook up really nicely with this particular type of kolache filling. So we are going to do half prune and half poppy seed on this last pan. A poppy seed is probably the most sort of acquired flavor. Some people have never had a poppy seed pastry. It's because it's a filling, it's not just like sprinkled on top. it's kind of a little bit unique. So I want to make sure this is all the way cooled down, first of all. But the poppy seed filling has lemon juice, sugar, corn syrup, poppy seeds, of course a lot of poppy seeds as you can see, and vanilla. And you want to make sure that it as well is thick. You want it to be a thick filling. You don't want it to be too thin or watery or jam-like. And the more cooled off the filling is, the more, the thicker it will be as well. So, but you also just don't want to put too hot of fillings into the kolaches anyways, because you don't want to kill the yeast. You want to make sure that it's still going to rise. So those are the poppy seed ones and the prune ones. Here we have the cherry and apple, more apple, and then poppy seed and prune. So these are going to just rise a little bit more till that kind of puffs up a little bit above the fruit, and then we're going to bake them. So this last and final rise should just be about 30 minutes unless you have a cold house. A lot of the rising times vary based on the temperature of your house. So we're going to just go ahead and heat up the oven to 350 Fahrenheit and pop those in there. Little glaze on top, we're going to just go ahead and squeeze out the juice of 1 lemon into a little bowl. That was the second half of the lemon that I squeezed, so I actually did squeeze a lemon. And we're going to add some vanilla, probably a teaspoon and a half or so. And then we're going to add in some powdered sugar. This is just a glaze that we're going to drizzle over all of the kolaches. Just lightly, just really thinly. This glaze kind of serves 2 purposes. One, it is decorative, but it also has a nice little flavor to it with that lemon juice and vanilla. So it's a nice little final touch to the pastry. So you want to make sure that your glaze is kind of runny, not too runny. It's probably a little bit too runny. I'm going to add a little more powdered sugar. But you want to make sure that it can drizzle. It's not so stiff that you have to spread it. Add a little bit more powdered sugar. Not too much, because that's really close to being the right consistency. Well, that's the perfect consistency right there. So these are fresh out of the oven. They should be lightly browned on the bottom and lightly brown, golden brown on the top. And here are the cherry ones. Okay, so they're out of the oven and we're going to just drizzle. First we'll kind of show you what they look like. Now we're going to just drizzle this across the top. So you can see that they're just really beautiful. I love the golden brown look on the top and on the bottom as well. And then that glaze just really pulls it all together. These again are the cherry and apple ones, and the prune and poppy seed ones are in the oven baking, so they're going to come out soon. Another nice aspect to these kolaches is that they stack really well, unlike some things like cupcakes or iced cookies or things with buttercream frosting. They stack really well on a plate and don't kind of mess each other up on the plate. So that's kind of a nice feature because you can make a nice plate of them and then you take the top ones off and they don't mess up the bottom ones. This is one cut in half and you should have that crumb going all the way through fully cooked. This is kind of how they stack up on a plate, and you can just put some saran wrap over that and bring them to somebody's house for a breakfast treat or whatever. We usually eat these on Christmas morning, so this is Christmas Eve, so they're ready for breakfast in the morning. These are the poppy seed and prune batch here. So just go ahead and put a couple pieces of saran wrap over each of those plates and let them set. Of course, Isaiah and I both had to have one. I think he had actually one of each kind. So I had a half of a one because that is what I had left in my macros for today. I'm counting macros for my weight loss journey, but I am saving my breakfast for 2 whole kolaches, and I'm going to enjoy those very much. So anyways, Merry Christmas to everyone. I hope that your holiday baking turns out beautifully. And once again, this is my version of the Czech pastry kolache.